Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about one of the most iconic and terrifying creations in the Warhammer 40k universe, the Space Marines. You've probably seen them before. Towering giants in Baroque armor, their visors glowing with an unholy light, stomping through war zones like gods of vengeance. But here's the thing, calling them soldiers doesn't even scratch the surface. That word feels too small, too human. Because Space Marines aren't just warriors. They're something else entirely. They're a myth, a warning, a symbol. In many ways, they are the Imperium. For a lot of fans, myself included, Space Marines were the gateway into this grimdark galaxy. They're on the cover of the books, the center of the tabletop, the stars of the video games. But once you dig deeper, once you look past the bolters and skulls, you realize they represent something much more twisted and fascinating. They're humanity's answer to extinction, a desperate gamble forged in blood and fire. They're not just tools of war, they're the religion, the ideal, and the curse of mankind, all rolled into one. And what really gets me is how easily they're misunderstood. People think they're just sci-fi super soldiers, a Warhammer version of Master Chief or Doomguy. But no, these aren't lone wolves or freedom fighters. These are brainwashed fanatics, molded by pain and purpose. Engineered to kill without hesitation, and to believe in what they're doing with a zeal that borders on madness. They don't fight for glory or peace. They fight because that's all they know. That's all they are. So when we ask, who are the Space Marines? We're not just asking for a list of facts. We're digging into the soul of the Imperium itself. Because to understand them is to understand the lengths humanity will go to in order to survive. And the price it's willing to pay. If there's one thing that sets the Space Marines apart from everything else in the galaxy, it's how they're made. Because they're not born, they're built. Piece by piece, gene by gene. Forged like weapons in a forge of blood, faith, and science, so dark it might as well be sorcery. And trust me, the process is just as brutal and awe-inspiring as the end result. Let's start with the gene seed, the cornerstone of what makes a Space Marine. Well, a Space Marine. This isn't just DNA, it's legacy. It's a living imprint of a Primarch, a distilled fragment of post-human perfection, passed down through generations of warriors. Every chapter carries the gene seed of its Primarch, and with it comes more than just biology. It carries ideology, instinct, even madness. You can't separate the Blood Angels from Sanguinius, or the Space Wolves from Lemon Russ, not just because they revere their gene father, but because they are him, in a way. His essence lives on in their cells. Creating an Astartes isn't as simple as injecting someone with super serum. It's a long, horrific process that takes place over years, and most don't survive. First, the candidate has to be young. Really young. We're talking early teens, sometimes even younger. And already, that tells you something chilling. These warriors aren't trained adults. They're broken boys, reshaped into killing machines before they even have a chance to become people. You think you've heard of child soldiers? This is that cranked up to 11, and then passed through the grimdark filter of 40k. Then come the implants, 19 of them. Each one surgically inserted at specific times, each one altering the body in ways that push it further from anything remotely human. There's the secondary heart, the os modula that reinforces bones, the biscopia that floods the body with muscle-generating hormones. The black carapace is the final layer, fusing them into their power armor like living circuit boards. And those are just the physical ones. Some are downright grotesque, like the omophagia, which lets them absorb memories by eating the flesh of others. Yeah, you read that right. Cannibalized knowledge. That's not just dark, that's Warhammer. But it's not just the body that's rewritten. Their minds are shattered and rebuilt too. Hypno-indoctrination, psycho-conditioning, neural programming. It's all designed to erase doubt, mercy, hesitation. They're flooded with war chants, images of their Primarch, the history of their chapter, and the absolute certainty that the Emperor's will is law. Most fans agree. By the time a recruit becomes a full-fledged battle brother, whatever person he once was is gone, erased. What remains is a creature of pure purpose. There's something both tragic and fascinating about that, because these aren't clones or mindless machines. They're real people, or at least they used to be. And that's what makes them so compelling. Each one had a name, a family, a planet. But all of that was burned away in the fires of transformation. Some fans even argue that the process is as much a spiritual death as a biological one. It's like a ritual sacrifice, except instead of killing the boy, they kill the human in him, and what rises in its place is something divine and monstrous at once. And not every chapter gets it right. Some gene seeds degrade over time. Some mutate. The cursed founding chapters, for instance, carry flaws so deep they border on the heretical. The Blood Angels have their Black Rage, the Space Wolves have their Bestial Curse of the Wolfen, and the Flesh Tearers, well, let's just say, subtlety isn't their strong suit. And yet, the Imperium keeps making more. Because in the end, these flaws are seen as acceptable losses. The Emperor's angels must keep flying, no matter the cost. Even the way gene seed is harvested is disturbing. When a Space Marine dies, his organs are retrieved, sometimes even mid-battle, so they can be implanted into the next generation. It's a cycle of rebirth drenched in blood and fire. There's something hauntingly religious about it, almost like martyrdom. One fan theory I've always loved is that the Emperor intended for this process to feel sacred, like a twisted form of sainthood. Each death feeding the next, a never-ending chain of sacrifice that holds the Imperium together. It's easy to look at a Space Marine and just see the armor, the weapons, the violence, but underneath all that is a horror story of transformation. These aren't just post-humans. They're monuments to what humanity can become when it trades compassion for survival and soul for strength. And that, more than anything, is what makes them the Imperium's ultimate warriors. Not because they were born for war, but because they were made to be nothing else. All right, let's stay in this eerie space where flesh meets legacy. Because if there's one thing that truly separates a Space Marine from the rest of humanity, it's what happens to him on the inside. Their genetic structure isn't just about strength or resilience. It's a complete rewriting of biology, identity, and even mortality. The process doesn't just create a warrior, it annihilates the person that once was and sculpts a living weapon in his place. And the thing is, the further you go down that road, the more disturbing it gets. The 19 gene seed organs aren't just some technobabble implants. They're each deliberately crafted, layered into the subject like a ritual of unmaking. And they have to be installed in a very precise order and time frame. That part always stuck with me, like a cursed alchemical sequence. You can't just throw all this tech into a body and hope for the best. No, it's methodical, almost sacred. Each stage is timed with development, pain thresholds, hormonal surges. It's like the body is being taught to die and then reborn into something it was never meant to be. And some of these organs do wild things. The melanochrome, for example, reacts to solar radiation, giving certain chapters their iconic skin tones. The salamander's obsidian black skin and glowing red eyes aren't just a stylistic choice, it's genetic modification turned into symbolism. Then there's the multi-lung. That's right, some Space Marines can literally breathe poison or survive underwater because they have extra lungs. It's this kind of design that turns them from soldiers into monsters, but in a very engineered way. One of the creepiest organs has to be the progenoid glands. These are the reason the whole system sustains itself. Tucked away in the neck and chest, they mature over time, storing the gene seed so it can be harvested later. And when I say harvested, I mean surgically removed, sometimes from a corpse, sometimes from a still living Marine. Think about that. Their bodies are not their own. From the moment they're inducted, they're part of a chain, a biological production line, stretching back to their Primarch and ultimately to the Emperor himself. And that leads to one of the most fascinating and often debated aspects of Astartes lore. Just how much of the original human remains. Some fans argue that even after all these changes, there's still a core of identity. That somewhere deep down, there's a memory of who they used to be, a thread of humanity that keeps them from tipping into full monstrosity. Others believe the process erases everything. That the implants, training, and indoctrination are so intense that the boy who was recruited dies completely, and what comes out is a new being altogether. I lean toward the second camp, honestly. It feels more in line with the grimdark of it all. The process isn't meant to preserve anything. It's meant to replace. You're not making a better human, you're making something else. Something that looks vaguely human on the outside, but is utterly alien in its instincts, morality, and function. And that's the point. The Imperium doesn't need heroes, it needs instruments. It needs enforcers of absolute will. There's also this eerie contrast between how sacred the gene seed is and how disposable the candidates often seem. Recruits are torn from death worlds, hive slums, feral tribes, chosen not for kindness or intelligence, but for savagery and survival instinct. They're put through a gauntlet of trials, often fighting each other to the death, just for the chance to become something more. And even then, most die during implantation. It's horrifying, but to the Imperium, it's necessary. Efficiency through atrocity. And still, as brutal and industrial as the whole system is, the gene seed is treated like a holy relic. Tech priests guard its purity with religious fervor. Apothecaries whisper prayers over the vials. Whole wars have been fought over contaminated or lost gene seed stock. It's not just genetic material. It's lineage. It's ancestry. You're not just carrying the tools of war in your veins. You're carrying the will of your Primarch, the echo of a demigod. That burden, that expectation follows every Astartes into battle. No matter how far they go, how many centuries pass, the gene seed is a chain dragging behind them, soaked in glory and blood. And then you get into the more cursed cases, like chapters that have to hide the instability of their gene seed or risk being purged. Think about that. There are Space Marines out there who know they're flawed, who feel something wrong inside them, but keep going anyway. That level of control and devotion is both terrifying and deeply tragic. They're not allowed to break, even when they know they're already broken. It's why I can't help but see the Astartes not just as warriors, but as victims of the Imperium's grand delusion. They were made to be perfect, unstoppable, unquestioning. But perfection, in this universe, always comes with a hidden cost. And when you look at what they go through, how they're sculpted from terrified children into towering juggernauts, you start to wonder if the Emperor didn't just create soldiers. Maybe he created prisons. Walking prisons of flesh and gene seed, each carrying the burden of a war that will never end. If the implants reshape the body, then the indoctrination shatters the mind and rebuilds it into something terrifyingly precise. One of the most overlooked aspects of a Space Marine's transformation is what happens inside their heads. People get so caught up in the muscles, the armor, the superhuman feats, that they forget these warriors were once boys. Fragile, scared, angry boys. And the only way to forge them into the Emperor's angels of death is to break them. Not just physically, but psychologically. It's not just about making them stronger, it's about making them obedient. Loyal, unquestioning, empty enough to be filled with doctrine. From the moment a recruit is chosen, the process begins. It's not just about tests of strength or endurance, though there's plenty of that. It's about stripping away identity. Imagine being taken from everything you know, your home, your name, your past, and thrown into a world of stone walls, prayers to a silent god, and instructors who see your death as part of the plan. You're told that weakness is treason, that doubt is heresy. There is no love, no comfort, no room for confusion. Just orders, pain, and the constant reminder that you are nothing. Nothing, unless you become one of them. The indoctrination process is so deep and invasive, it borders on the surreal. Hypno-learning is a big part of it. Recruits are subjected to nightly brainwashing sessions where information, combat tactics, and sacred texts are pumped into their minds while they sleep, or rather, while they lie in chemically induced comas. Over time, they start to dream in the language of war. They recite battle chants like mantras. Their reflexes become responses to stimuli they didn't even consciously absorb. And after years of this, they emerge not just trained, but transformed, their very thoughts molded into weapons. But it doesn't stop with passive programming. The trials are physical, mental, and emotional. One of the more infamous examples is the harrowing, a trial that varies from chapter to chapter, but always involves isolation, starvation, and fear. Sometimes they're left in darkness for days. Sometimes they're buried alive. Sometimes they're forced to fight other recruits, not for points or promotions, but just to survive. The idea is to push them past the point of breaking and see who's still standing on the other side. Not because the Imperium wants strong individuals, but because only those who submit to something greater are worth keeping. There's a saying among fans that the Imperium doesn't train Space Marines, they erase them. And I think there's truth in that. You're not really meant to question orders, to feel remorse, to form attachments. Brotherhood? Yes. Loyalty? Absolutely. But never emotion in the human sense. That's where the psycho-conditioning comes in. This isn't your typical military drill sergeant yelling insults. This is neural remapping. They can literally rewire a recruit's brain to suppress fear, to override hesitation, to flood the system with adrenaline or cortisol depending on the need. It's like turning a person into a combat algorithm. And let's not forget the religious element. Astartes aren't just warriors, they're saints of war. Even though the Emperor himself rejected godhood, the Imperium turned him into a deity anyway, and the Space Marines were caught right in the middle of that myth-making. Recruits are taught to worship the Emperor as the embodiment of divine order. Every kill, every campaign, every breath is a holy act. Some chapters are more zealous than others. The Black Templars, for example, are practically crusading fanatics, but even the more stoic legions carry that weight. You're not just fighting for survival, you're fighting for righteousness. And that kind of faith, when fused with the trauma of their upbringing, creates something incredibly dangerous. You get warriors who are not just physically superior, but utterly convinced of their own moral infallibility. They don't question the cause, because to question is to fall. And that, to me, is one of the most chilling things about the Space Marines. They don't hate the enemy because they're angry. They hate because they're supposed to, because they've been told that hate is holy. Mercy is heresy, and hesitation is death. Some fans speculate about the rare cases where this programming starts to unravel. There are stories of Marines experiencing flashbacks or remnants of their past selves bubbling up during moments of quiet. These are rare and often suppressed by the chapter if they become noticeable. But it raises a terrifying question. What happens when the cracks start to show? Is there a buried core of humanity still trapped inside that armor, screaming to be heard? Or is it just a ghost, echoing through an empty shell? The way I see it, what makes the Astartes so horrifying isn't just their power, it's their certainty. They don't doubt, they don't hesitate. They believe. Completely. And that belief has been hardwired into their minds from the start, through fire, ritual, and neural manipulation. When you take a child and tell him every day that he was born to die for a cause, and then give him the means to make it happen, you don't get a soldier. You get a zealot in armor, a weapon with no off switch. And that, more than anything, is what defines the soul of a Space Marine. Or what's left of it. If you've ever looked at a Space Marine and thought, okay, this guy's unstoppable, then you need to remember, he's never alone. Behind every Astartes stands a whole chapter. And that word chapter might sound a little sterile, like a bureaucratic footnote, but trust me, it's anything but. In the Warhammer universe, a chapter isn't just a military unit. It's a cult, a fortress, a bloodline, a legacy. It's a world in itself, governed by its own laws, rituals, and bonds stronger than steel. It's where the human, if any of it still remains, hides in the cracks between duty and devotion. Let's get something clear right away. Not all chapters are the same. Sure, there's the Codex Astartes, that massive tome written by Roboute Guilliman himself after the Horus Heresy, a guide meant to bring order to the chaos of the legions. But not every chapter follows it to the letter. Some treat it like holy scripture, others like a polite suggestion, and a few ignore it entirely. But despite their differences, every chapter operates on a basic framework, one designed to turn 1,000 superhuman warriors into a perfect engine of war. At the top is the chapter master. This guy isn't just a general, he's a living symbol of the chapter's identity, often revered like a saint. Some are quiet tacticians, others are war gods in their own right. What's fascinating is that his authority is practically absolute, but it's never exercised with pettiness. There's this weird balance between hierarchy and brotherhood in the Astartes. Everyone knows their place, but it's not about ego. It's about the mission. The chapter master doesn't rule with an iron fist. He embodies the chapter's will. Below him, you've got the captains, each leading a company, and this is where it gets more personal. Every company is like a family within the greater family. They train together, fight together, bleed together. It's not just a chain of command. It's shared trauma, shared glory. The bonds they form are deeper than anything most humans could even imagine, and they have their own rituals too. Oaths of moment, purity seals, battle rites, it's all a way of reinforcing identity, of reminding each Astartes who they are and what they fight for. And then there are the specialists. The chaplains, with their skull helms and thunderous sermons, keep the spiritual fire burning. They're not just priests. They're morale, memory, and wrath all rolled into one. The apothecaries are more than medics. They're gene seed guardians, harvesting the sacred organs of fallen brothers to preserve the chapter's future. Librarians wield the warp, walking a razor's edge between sanctioned psychic power and potential damnation. And the tech marines serve the chapter's war machines, answering to the mysterious Adeptus Mechanicus while still pledging loyalty to their battle brothers. Each role is vital. Each one is steeped in layers of duty, mystery, and ancient tradition. But what I love most is how chapters become cultures. They're shaped by their homeworlds, their history, and especially their primarchs. The Space Wolves are nothing like the Ultramarines, and neither would recognize themselves in the Raven Guard or the White Scars. That's not just flavor, it's the heart of the whole system. The chapter isn't just where you serve, it's who you are. It's tattooed into your skin, carved into your armor, and embedded in your very blood through the gene seed. You don't just wear the colors, you live them. Bands have always speculated about how much independence chapters truly have. Technically, they serve the Imperium, but in practice, a chapter can ignore a plea for aid if it doesn't align with their priorities. They can wage wars of vengeance, hold grudges for centuries, or vanish into crusades that span generations. There's this tension, this unspoken freedom, that makes them both noble defenders and dangerous wildcards. Some even argue that the Astartes are more loyal to their chapter than to the Imperium itself. And honestly, I think that's true for a lot of them. When your brothers are all you've known, when your fortress monastery is your whole world, how could anything else compete? The fortress monasteries themselves are another layer of awe. These aren't just bases, they're sacred citadels. Part cathedral, part armory, part tomb. Inside you'll find relics that are centuries old, statues of fallen heroes, archives filled with war records and sacred texts. Some chapters guard secrets so ancient and dangerous they've been buried even from their own initiates. And every part of these places is steeped in ritual. Initiations happen in crypts. Oaths are sworn before flame-lit icons. Battle prayers echo through vast steel corridors like thunder. Even deployment is a ritual. Before a battle, the Astartes don't just suit up, they prepare. They meditate, they chant, they anoint their weapons with sacred oils, they read the names of fallen brothers. War isn't just duty, it's communion. It's how they honor their ancestors, how they express faith, and how they find meaning in endless conflict. It's this fusion of military precision and spiritual fervor that gives each chapter its soul. It's why you can feel the difference between a mission led by the stoic Imperial Fists and one charged by the wild fury of the Black Templars. They all bleed for the same emperor, but they believe in him in their own way. And that belief shapes everything, from how they fight, to how they mourn, to how they die. When I think of the Astartes, I don't just see armies, I see microcosms of belief, culture, and identity. I see warriors who are part war machine, part priesthood, part brotherhood. The chapter is where that all comes together. It's where the machine of war becomes personal, sacred, and eternal. And that's what makes them so damn compelling. They aren't just a military force, they're 1,000 different worlds marching under one banner, each carrying its own legends, its own ghosts, and its own unbreakable bond. When you think of a Space Marine, the first image that probably flashes into your head is that iconic silhouette. Towering, armored, armed to the teeth, like a walking tank blessed by some techno-religious god. And let me tell you, that image isn't far from the truth. The gear they wield isn't just equipment, it's an extension of their purpose, their belief, their identity. Every bolt gun, every chainsword, every rune-etched plate of armor is steeped in centuries of craftsmanship, symbolism, and reverence. In the Imperium, war isn't just fought, it's worshipped. And the Astartes are its high priests, clad in relics that would be museum pieces in any other universe. Let's start with the armor. Power armor is probably the single most iconic piece of tech in all of Warhammer 40k, and there's a reason for that. It's not just protection, it's transformation. When a Space Marine dons his armor, he's not suiting up like some guy in fatigues. He's becoming part of a legacy, literally plugging his body into a system that amplifies his strength, enhances his senses, and links him to centuries of bloodshed. The armor reads his biometrics, channels energy through his limbs, filters poisons, seals against the void. It's practically alive, and it remembers. There are different marks of power armor, each with its own aesthetic and battlefield purpose. Some fans are obsessed with these distinctions. I know people who can tell the difference between Mark IV and Mark VI just from the knee joints. And it's not just nerd trivia. Each mark represents a different era of the Imperium, a different philosophy of war. For instance, the sleeker, more advanced Mark VIII errant armor reflects a time of rebuilding after the heresy, while the older Mark III iron armor is practically medieval in its brutal, slab-like design, built for boarding actions and tunnel fighting. The fact that some chapters still wear these ancient suits maintained by tech marines like Sacred Relics says everything about how the Imperium views its technology. Not as tools, but as relics. And then you've got the weapons. The standard bolter isn't just a gun, it's a symbol of absolute authority. When a Space Marine raises a bolter, he's not just pulling a trigger, he's enacting judgment. Firing a bolter doesn't just hit someone, it detonates them. Each round is a self-propelled, mass-reactive explosive designed to punch into flesh and then explode inside. It's messy, it's horrifying, and it's entirely deliberate. The Imperium doesn't just want to kill its enemies, it wants to obliterate them, to make a statement. But that's just the starting point. There's a whole arsenal of devastation tailored to every possible combat scenario. Plasma weapons that burn hotter than a star, but might kill the user if they overheat. Melt-a-guns that can reduce a tank to molten slag in seconds. Chainswords that roar like beasts, each tooth blessed and sharpened to slice through armor and bone with equal ease. Power fists that can punch through walls or crush skulls like grapes. It's all excessive, brutal, and beautifully over the top. Exactly what you'd expect from the gothic insanity of the Imperium. And the really cool thing is how each chapter personalizes its gear. The Dark Angels carve their armor with angelic script and shrouds, adding an almost monastic look to their warriors. The Space Wolves adorn theirs with pelts, fetishes, and runes, turning each Marine into a mythical beast from Norse legend. The Blood Angels carry the elegance of lost nobility, their weapons and armor as ornate as they are deadly. Even the colors and heraldry tell stories. Each purity seal, each aquila, each kill mark is part of a visual language that speaks of honor, shame, victories, and oaths. A lot of fans love to debate whether the Imperium's tech is actually good or just cobbled together relics of a more advanced age. Personally, I think it's both. The Astartes use weapons and armor that should be obsolete, but because they believe in them, because they care for them with the devotion of monks, they still work, maybe even better than they should. There's this whole theory that faith in the machine spirit isn't just superstition, but actually matters in the warp-infused reality of the 40k universe. So when a tech marine prays over a Lascanon or offers incense to a servo arm, it's not just ritual, it's function. Belief becomes performance. Performance becomes power. And let's not forget about relics. Some weapons and suits of armor are so ancient, so sacred, that they're only worn in the direst circumstances. Imagine strapping on a suit of armor worn by a hero 10,000 years ago, knowing it still bears the scorched handprint of a daemon you now must face again. These artifacts don't just offer power, they carry expectation. You're not just fighting for victory. You're fighting to be worthy of the past. There's something deeply poetic about it, in a grim and broken way. These aren't shiny new prototypes from a lab. They're weapons made holy by use, by blood, by memory. The Imperium doesn't innovate. It endures. It repurposes. It rebuilds the same storm bolter 1,000 times, not to improve it, but to preserve it. Every scratch on a pauldron, every scorched barrel, every oil-stained rune etched into the armor tells a story. And Space Marines carry those stories into every war zone, like living, breathing chronicles of humanity's refusal to die quietly. So when you see a Space Marine step onto the battlefield surrounded by fire and ruin, know this: He's not just armored in ceramite and steel. He's armored in legacy, in ritual, in belief. Every shot he fires, every strike he makes, echoes through millennia of unending war. And that's what makes his gear so much more than just tools of war. They're extensions of his soul, or whatever's left of it. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about Space Marines is that they're just brutes, walking tanks who show up, shoot everything that moves, and leave nothing but craters behind. And yeah, sure, they can do that, but the truth is way more nuanced, and honestly, way more terrifying. These warriors don't just fight, they execute. They perform war like it's an art form, refined over 10,000 years of blood-soaked history. Every strike, every landing, every moment on the battlefield is calculated. If the enemy even realizes the Space Marines are coming, they've already lost half the fight. What makes their tactics so deadly isn't just their strength, it's their speed, precision, and adaptability. 1,000 Space Marines might not sound like much when you're talking about galaxy-wide conflict. But these aren't your average soldiers. These are rapid reaction demigods, trained to operate in conditions that would shatter entire battalions. They don't wage war like the Imperial Guard, grinding out victory through numbers. They're surgical. When a chapter is deployed, they're not there to hold ground. They're there to break the enemy's spine. Assaults are where they truly shine. One of the most iconic tactics is orbital drop. Picture this. From high orbit, Thunderhawks and drop pods scream through the atmosphere, slamming into the Earth like burning meteors. Within seconds, hatches burst open and ceramite-clad giants charge out, weapons primed, bolters roaring. It's not just sudden, it's overwhelming. The idea is to sow fear and confusion, to hit so hard and so fast that the enemy can't respond. It's about momentum, brutality, and complete battlefield domination within minutes of arrival. Drop pod assaults are one of my favorite aspects of Astartes warfare. There's something incredibly poetic about it. The idea of these warriors being fired from orbit like ammunition, slamming into the front lines with the impact of a god's fist. And they train for this, over and over. Every Marine knows exactly where he's going to land, what formation to adopt, what role he'll play in the first 30 seconds. There's no hesitation, no chatter, just instinct and mission. But they're not just hammers, they're scalpels too. In urban combat, Space Marines use shock and awe to isolate and eliminate. They move through streets like shadows, using jump packs to leap between rooftops or descend into hostile zones with terrifying speed. Their armor makes them mobile fortresses, and their discipline means they move as one, fluid, silent, lethal. The Codex Astartes, that massive doctrine penned by Gilliman, outlines countless scenarios, responses, counter-responses. But it's not just a rulebook, it's a philosophy of war. It's the belief that battle can be perfected, and that the Astartes are the tools of that perfection. Different chapters apply the Codex in different ways. Some follow it to the letter, others adapt it, or abandon parts of it altogether. The Ultramarines are the classic example of strict adherence, with their battle plans reading like holy scripture. But then you've got chapters like the Space Wolves, who fight more like packs of hunters, fluid, instinctive, wild. And both approaches work. That's the genius of the Astartes, they're flexible. Each chapter evolves its own doctrines based on history, environment, and culture. A Space Marine from the Raven Guard will approach combat with stealth, sabotage, and psychological warfare. One from the Black Templars will charge headlong into the fray, chanting litanies and swinging relic blades with apocalyptic fury. Same genetic foundation, completely different expression. There's also the psychological element. Space Marines are terrifying. They use that. Imagine being a heretic in some fortress, watching the skies split open and knowing those aren't ships, they're warnings. The moment you see a Space Marine, you know things have already gone wrong. And that fear spreads. Astartes' doctrine often emphasizes the demoralization of the enemy, not just through destruction, but through presence. That's why they march slowly sometimes, deliberately, letting the enemy see what's coming. That's why they paint their armor in nightmare hues, wear bones and trophies, etch kill marks into their pauldrons. They're not just there to win, they're there to crush hope. And yet, they're not mindless berserkers. Every action has a purpose. Every unit is trained in independent operations. A single squad can be dropped onto a planet and hold or destroy key positions without outside support. That's not just strength, that's autonomy. It means the Imperium can send them into hellholes that would eat normal armies alive, and the Astartes will not only survive, they'll thrive. That independence is part of what makes them so terrifying to the enemies of mankind, and, sometimes, even to the Imperium itself. Some fans theorize that this tactical genius is also their curse, that the Astartes are too effective, too autonomous. That's why the High Lords keep them isolated, scattered into chapters, rarely deployed en masse. Because if you had 1,000,000 of these warriors acting in concert, well, we already saw what happened during the heresy. When that kind of power turns against you, it's not a rebellion, it's the apocalypse. There's also something elegant about how they approach failure. When a Space Marine operation doesn't go according to plan, they adapt. They learn. Not just in a post-battle debrief, but in real time. Mid-fight, a squad leader will reassign roles, change objectives, redirect force. That kind of tactical flexibility is rare in the Imperium, where most armies operate like lumbering machines. But the Astartes think. They're not drones. They're officers, leaders, warriors. Every Marine is expected to carry the knowledge of 100 battles and apply it instinctively. When I look at how Space Marines fight, I don't just see destruction. I see design. I see centuries of doctrine, trial, and perfection woven into every movement. They're not just better soldiers. They're something else entirely. War isn't just their duty, it's their nature, their language, their prayer. And when they go to battle, they don't just bring weapons, they bring certainty. That is why they win, and that is why they're feared. Here's the thing, no one really tells you when you're first getting into Space Marines. For all their strength, loyalty, and divine purpose, they are not unbreakable. In fact, it's the cracks in their armor, the internal fractures, the whispered doubts, the legacy of betrayal that make them so haunting. The Imperium parades them as flawless champions, living weapons forged in the Emperor's image. But dig a little deeper, and you start to see something far darker. Because beneath all the ritual and devotion, there's a terrifying truth. Space Marines can fall, and when they do, they fall harder than anyone else in the galaxy. It starts small, a question here, a dream there. A strange mutation that the apothecaries whisper about but never report. Or maybe it begins with faith itself, too much of it, twisted into fanaticism. The very traits that make Space Marines so powerful. Absolute loyalty, unshakable belief, total suppression of fear, also make them vulnerable. Because when that belief is shaken, when loyalty is tested, there's no buffer, no middle ground. A regular human might doubt and stumble and recover. Astartes, they either stay locked in that belief forever or shatter into something monstrous. Let's not forget the Horus Heresy. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a psychic earthquake that tore the very soul of the Imperium in half. Half the legions, whole brotherhoods of genetically engineered demigods, turned on the Emperor, and not because they were weak, but because they were human underneath all that armor. Pride, jealousy, grief, ambition, those things didn't die during implantation. They were buried, and when the right pressure was applied, they surfaced like beasts. Take the word bearers. These were once the most devout of all the legions, obsessed with honoring the Emperor as a god. When he rejected their worship, they didn't abandon their faith, they redirected it, straight into the arms of chaos. Or the World Eaters, whose pursuit of martial perfection turned into an addiction to bloodshed, driven by Khorne until they were more beast than warrior. These weren't accidents. They were the logical outcome of a system that demanded total loyalty, but never allowed for vulnerability or doubt. Even after the heresy, the shadows didn't go away. The Space Marines fractured, not just physically into chapters, but ideologically. The Codex Astartes was supposed to prevent future rebellions, but in doing so, it also fragmented unity. Now you've got chapters like the Black Templars, who ride the edge of fanaticism, launching endless crusades with little oversight. Some fans argue they're a hair's breadth away from being declared heretical themselves. Others think they already are, and the High Lords are just too afraid to confront it. And then there are the mutations. Not all gene seed is stable. Over time, some strains have begun to warp. The Blood Angels suffer from the Black Rage, a psychic echo of their Primarch's death that turns battle brothers into frothing lunatics, consumed by visions of Sanguinius's final moments. The Space Wolves have their own beast within, the Curse of the Wolfen, a regression into a feral, wolf-like state that they try to control but never truly cure. These aren't just side effects, they're wounds, etched deep into the genetic memory of the Astartes. And what's worse, they're inherited, passed down like cursed heirlooms, generation after generation. What does it say about the Imperium that it keeps making more of these warriors, knowing full well the risks? That some chapters are quietly watched by the Inquisition, just waiting for them to tip over the edge? It's chilling. Because while the Imperium paints the Astartes as saints of war, it knows they're not. It knows they can break. And so it prepares for that eventuality, even while pretending it doesn't exist. There's a theory I've always found compelling, that the Astartes were never meant to last this long, that the Emperor designed them for the Great Crusade to be disposable demigods for a limited time. But the Imperium couldn't let go. And now, 10,000 years later, these warriors are still marching, still fighting, their flaws deepening with every passing century. They're relics of a war that never truly ended, forced to exist in a world they were never meant to see. It's tragic, honestly. And what about the chapters that vanish? Sometimes it's chaos corruption. Other times, it's internal rot. Schisms, rebellion, forbidden experiments. The cursed founding alone produced multiple chapters so unstable they had to be erased from history. The Imperium doesn't advertise these failures, but they're there. Ghost stories among the librarians, censored archives in the vaults of the Inquisition. The silence around them is almost more damning than the truth. What makes it all so powerful is the contrast. These warriors are built to be flawless, to never question, to never fall. But again and again, they do. Because perfection is a lie. Because even the greatest weapons carry within them the seeds of decay. And the Space Marines, for all their strength, are still trapped in that cycle, worshipped for their purity, haunted by their imperfection. That's why I love the grimdark tone of this universe. It's not just about explosions and heroics, it's about systems cracking under their own weight. About faith becoming poison. About how even the Emperor's angels have shadows. And if you stare too long at the glow of their power armor, you might just start to see the cracks in the light. If you hang around Warhammer fans long enough, you'll notice something pretty quickly. We all have our favorite chapters. Some love the savage fury of the Space Wolves. Others are loyal to the tragic nobility of the Blood Angels. And of course, there's the ever-present Ultramarines, the shining example of what the Codex Astartes was meant to be. These aren't just different paint jobs on the same model kit. These chapters carry entire philosophies, cultures, and centuries of stories. They're living myths, each one with its own tone and tragedy. And the heroes that rise from them? They're more than just names in a rulebook. They're icons, legends, sometimes even saints. Let's start with the Ultramarines, because love them or hate them, they're everywhere. Some fans call them the poster boys, and yeah, there's some truth to that. But once you move past the memes, you realize just how important they are to the structure of the Imperium. Robert Guilliman, their Primarch, didn't just lead his legion during the Great Crusade, he redefined the Astartes after the heresy. The Codex Astartes, that massive doctrine we keep coming back to, was his creation. It broke the legions into chapters, ensured no single force could grow too powerful, and laid down the strategic backbone of the Imperium. People call it rigid, overly formal, even cold. But it works. It endures. Just like Guilliman himself. And now, 10,000 years later, Guilliman is back. Reborn in a galaxy that barely resembles the one he left, struggling to lead a decaying empire that treats him like a demigod. Some fans love this arc. It's tragic, hopeful, frustrating all at once. Others think he's too clean for 40k, too rational for the madness around him. But that's what makes him compelling. He's not trying to be the savior of mankind. He's trying to fix something that might already be beyond saving. And watching him try, again and again in the face of endless war, it hits hard. Then there are the Blood Angels. If the Ultramarines are about discipline and structure, the Blood Angels are about beauty, sorrow, and rage. They're artists as much as they are warriors, obsessed with perfection in battle, form, and spirit. But beneath that grace lies something broken. The Black Rage isn't just a mutation, it's a curse, a psychic scar left by the death of their Primarch Sanguinius. Every Blood Angel carries the memory of his fall, and for some, that memory takes over entirely. They lose themselves to it, becoming berserkers who think they are Sanguinius in his final moments. It's one of the most haunting aspects of any chapter, that their greatest source of inspiration is also the thing most likely to destroy them. And leading them is Commander Dante. This guy is ancient, even by Astartes standards. He's been fighting for over 1,000 years, carrying the burden of his chapter, his brothers, and his own looming mortality. There's this quiet tragedy about him. He's not just a leader, he's a witness. He's seen generations of brothers rise and fall. He's survived battles that should have killed gods, and yet he keeps going. Not because he believes he'll win, but because he has to. He's the kind of hero that doesn't shout or boast, he endures. And that, in the grimdark, is the highest kind of heroism there is. And then we have the Space Wolves. Wild, rebellious, and proud, they're almost a rejection of everything Guilliman tried to create. They don't follow the Codex Astartes. They barely follow anyone, really. But they fight with honor, ferocity, and a strange, noble savagery. Their homeworld Fenris is a death world in every sense, a frozen hellscape where only the strongest survive. And that harshness bleeds into everything they do. Their rituals, their oaths, their fighting style, they're not polished, they're not organized. But they believe, deeply, fiercely, and that faith makes them dangerous. Fans are divided on whether the wolves are reckless or brilliant. Personally, I think they're both. They fight like predators relying on instinct, brotherhood, and sheer momentum. But when they strike with precision. They don't just charge, they hunt. And their Primarch, Lemon Russ, embodied that philosophy. He was the Emperor's executioner, the one sent to bring rogue Primarchs to heel. And when he disappeared, he left behind not despair, but purpose. The Space Wolves are still waiting for his return, still fighting his war, not out of duty, but out of loyalty. There's something primal and powerful in that. There are so many more, each chapter its own mythology. The Raven Guard, masters of stealth and sabotage, still haunted by the near annihilation of their legion. The Salamanders, protectors of the weak, who believe that strength should be used in defense, not domination. The Iron Hands, obsessed with perfection through cybernetics, forever mourning their fallen Primarch. And that's the thing, their stories aren't clean. They're not wrapped up in neat hero arcs. They're full of loss, failure, sacrifice. They're human, even when the humanity has been carved out of them. It's those stories that keep me coming back. Not the power levels or the gear, but the emotion, the scars, the way these warriors, genetically engineered, psycho-conditioned, practically immortal, still carry grief, pride, doubt, the way they try, in their own fractured ways, to live up to legends that may never have been real. In a universe where hope is a joke and peace is a myth, they keep fighting. Not because they think they'll win, but because it's all they know. And in doing so, they become more than soldiers. They become symbols. Flawed, terrifying, beautiful symbols of what it means to fight without end. Let's be honest. No matter how deep you dig into Warhammer 40k, no matter how many Xeno-species or obscure Forge World factions you learn about, you always come back to the Space Marines. They're everywhere. They're on the covers, in the center of the box sets, in every cinematic trailer. For some people, that makes them overrated. For others, they're the beating heart of the setting. But love them or roll your eyes at them, there's no denying they're iconic. And what's wild is that their popularity isn't just about how strong or cool they are. It's about what they represent and how the fandom has turned them into living mythology. Part of their staying power comes from how flexible they are. Every chapter is a canvas, and fans have painted them with every emotion and ideology under the sun. Some are noble protectors, others are borderline psychopaths. Some are haunted by tragedy, others revel in war. You want knightly crusaders? You've got the Black Templars. Barbarian space Vikings, space wolves. Fallen angels, blood angels. Tactical perfectionists, ultramarines. It's not just variety, it's storytelling potential. That's why fan-made chapters are so popular. Everyone wants to put a piece of themselves into the armor. Everyone wants to imagine what kind of warrior they'd be in a world where death is holy and war never ends. But beyond that, there's this strange emotional gravity to the Astartes. On the surface, they're completely inhuman. 9 feet tall, emotionless, nearly immortal. But when you scratch beneath the surface, you find fragments of humanity, echoes of what they were before the implants, before the indoctrination. And those glimpses hit hard. The idea that inside all that armor is someone who remembers being human, even if only in dreams. That kind of tension between man and monster, purpose and identity, is where some of the most beautiful and heartbreaking fan theories live. One of the biggest ongoing conversations in the fandom right now is about the end times, the so-called Era Indomitus, the return of Guilliman, and what role the Astartes will play in the final chapters of humanity's story. Some believe they'll be the last defenders, holding the line while Terra burns, while the Emperor finally dies or ascends. Others think they're already obsolete, that the Primaris Marines are the future, and the old Astartes are relics clinging to a past that's already collapsing. And then there are those who believe the ultimate tragedy of the Astartes is that they'll outlive humanity itself, fighting on in the name of a dead species, long after there's nothing left to protect. There's also this recurring theory that the Space Marines were never meant to be saviors, that the Emperor didn't build them to win a war, but to delay the inevitable. 1,000 years here, 1,000 there, just buying time until something better could be born. If that's true, then the Astartes are tragic in a whole new way. Not just doomed warriors, but placeholders in a galactic waiting room, holding a position that was never theirs to keep. That theory always gives me chills, because it reframes their heroism. They're not fighting for victory, they're fighting to stall the void for just one more day. In the fandom, that blend of power and tragedy has become a kind of language. We write about them, meme them, reimagine them in other genres. There are fan comics where they're treated like lost gods wandering through time. There are fanfics that humanize them to the point of tears. And then there are endless debates. Should they have emotions? Should they be allowed to love, to remember, to doubt? Are they still men, or are they something else entirely? Everyone has their take, and that's part of the fun. You can engage with the Astartes however you want. Gritty realism, tragic horror, grimdark comedy, even satire. They're a mirror, really. What you see in them says more about you than about them, and maybe that's why they're so enduring. Because for all their in-universe dogma and sacred protocols, they've become this living mythology that fans shape and reshape constantly. The same Marine might be a cold, robotic killing machine in one story, and a haunted warrior searching for meaning in another, and both versions feel true. That duality is what makes them more than just power fantasy. It makes them poetic. When you step back, it's kind of wild how a concept so built on violence and absolutes has inspired so much nuance and creativity. We should have gotten bored of Space Marines by now. But instead, we keep reinventing them. We keep asking new questions. What happens when one of them loses faith? What happens when they disobey a command to protect a civilian? What happens when one of them remembers the boy he used to be? Those little emotional tremors, those brief flashes of doubt, tenderness, rebellion, they feel more powerful than any bolter round. The irony is that the Imperium wants the Astartes to be simple, predictable, loyal, but the fandom refuses to let them be that. We make them complicated, flawed, real, and in doing so we give them more life than the setting ever intended. That's why they've become so cult-worthy. Not because they're perfect, but because they aren't. Because they're trying. Because they fall. Because somewhere, buried beneath the doctrine and augmentation, there's still a spark of soul. And in the world of 40k, that might be the rarest miracle of all. So who are the Space Marines, really? After everything we've explored, from their tortured creation to their sacred armor, from the brotherhood of chapters to the madness hiding behind the purity seals, what's left? What are we really looking at when we stare into the glowing eyes of an Astartes? I think the answer is more complicated and more heartbreaking than most people expect. They're not just super soldiers. They're not just fanatics or martyrs or monsters. They're all of those things, and none of them. They're walking contradictions, sculpted to be flawless but defined by their flaws. They're the Imperium's ultimate triumph and its most damning failure. built to protect humanity, yet stripped of almost everything that made them human. They are brothers who rarely feel brotherhood, saints of war who can no longer pray, avatars of loyalty who were forged through pain and loss. They are the shadow of the Emperor's ambition and the proof of his cruelty. What makes them so terrifying isn't just their power, it's their clarity, their unwavering sense of purpose. When a Space Marine enters a war zone, he doesn't hesitate, he doesn't second guess, he knows what must be done. And in a universe where most people die screaming, alone, and forgotten, that kind of certainty might be the most alien thing of all. But that's also what makes them magnetic. You can't look away from them. You want to understand how someone can be that resolute, that efficient, that lost, and that's why they're worshipped and feared at the same time. The average Imperial citizen might never see a Space Marine in their lifetime, but if they do, it'll be in fire and fury. Maybe they're being saved, maybe they're collateral. Either way, the Marine won't blink, he won't ask questions, he'll do what he's been programmed, ordained to do. That's divine terror. The kind of fear that inspires statues and holy books, but never trust. You don't love a Space Marine, you revere him, and then you get out of his way. But for us, the fans, it's different. We don't just see the surface, we dig deeper, we want to. That's why we spend hours reading codices, arguing about chapters, writing stories, making art, because somewhere beneath the war cries and bolter fire, we feel something real, something tragic, something noble. These warriors, for all their monstrous glory, mean something to us. They're our myths, our fallen angels, our endless question marks. Every time they charge into battle, we ask ourselves, could I live like that? Could I sacrifice like that? Would I want to? And maybe that's the secret. Space Marines are everything we wish we could be when we're afraid, and everything we're terrified of becoming if we lose ourselves. They're mirrors, weapons, icons, curses. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where hope is as rare as silence, they shine like lighthouses built from bone and steel. They remind us that strength doesn't always look kind, that purpose can be a prison, and that glory, real glory, is often soaked in blood. So yeah, maybe the Imperium calls them angels of death, maybe the enemies of mankind see them as demons. But for me, and I think for a lot of us, there's something else. They're stories. And stories are how we make sense of chaos. In a galaxy gone mad, the Space Marines are the ones still marching forward. Still fighting. Still believing. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only thing they know how to do. If this journey through their world gave you even a glimpse of that depth, of the complexity behind the ceramite, then stick around. There's so much more in this universe to unravel. So many more broken heroes, ancient secrets, and terrifying truths to uncover. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And let's keep diving deeper together. Because in the end, the story of the Space Marines isn't just about war. It's about what we become when war never ends.